Hey y'all, my name is Anna, welcome to my channel, and today this video is a little bit different from what I normally do, but I'm kind of excited about it. I think it was a couple months back, I don't really know how time works anymore after being in quarantine, but I watched Laura May Beauty make a video about larger palettes that she made edits of for smaller palettes. Say hi to Ace, everyone. He's just gonna be here. So she was basically condensing these extensively large palettes that had just a bunch of duplicated shades of like brown half the time because Morphe. But I thought that was a really cool concept, and I kind of wanted to put my own spin on it because I didn't really want the pressure of trying to edit down palettes to what people, mass markets, would want edited down. So I guess selfishly, I did large palettes that I found myself attracted to, but then I chose the shades that I actually truly wanted. And I feel like this is almost like an anti-haul for me to see how much do I really want of a palette, and is that worth it for how many shades are actually in there if I only want so many eyeshadows. Because there's a difference between how many eyeshadows would I use and how many eyeshadows do I actually want the palette for. And I feel like I want to buy palettes because I like the majority, if not all, of the shades instead of just eyeshadows I would use, if that makes sense. So I chose just 4 palettes for today. 3 of them are more drugstore. I only chose palettes that I found myself visually intrigued or attracted to, at least initially, before I might have like edited them down. Also, if someone else has done a video like this, please let me know. I'm sure I'm not the first person to do something like this. I mean, I already told you that I was inspired by Laura May Beauty. I can link her video down below. It's really good, and I really hope that brands move towards more curated palettes. I feel like there's been a trend of brands making smaller palettes, and I'm really hoping that that continues, because the whole big palette thing, not only is it inconvenient to store, but most likely the individual buying it will not want to use all of the shades. Now, that could be said about any size palette, but a lot of times they're attracted to some of the shadows, but not the majority, or the majority is something they already have, because I feel like every other palette, more so actually than that, has standard neutrals that everyone has many times over if they get more than one palette. So let's start with a Profusion palette. Now, I've been interested in their brand because they make really inexpensive eyeshadow palettes, and I've heard that their quality is pretty good considering they are so inexpensive, and they are cruelty-free. So I was like, sweet, that seems like something I'd want to get. And while they have been making smaller palettes recently, none of the color schemes in the smaller palettes have been ones that I wanted. Like initially at first I was like, ooh, Emerald's palette, Sapphire's palette. Then I looked up like videos and swatches of them, and then I realized this isn't what I thought it was by the picture, and I realized I didn't actually want most of the shades. So the only eyeshadow palettes I have been attracted to color story wise have been like the 35 pan ones, and there's no way for me to be able to justify getting that big of a palette unless if I like 30 of the shadows, you know what I mean? And so one of them was the Lovestruck palette. Now, if you don't know me already, I really like pinks and purples on my eyes because I have a more cool tone skin tone. I just realized I have like eyeshadow swatches on my hand. Y'all are just gonna have to ignore that. Sometimes I like to swatch things to help me figure out what I want to do on my eyes, and I didn't wipe it off, so it just looks a little strange. But the Lovestruck palette is very pinky purple with a little bit of blue and gold, a little bit of like different, some warm neutrals and pinky neutrals. But when I truly looked at what I would want from that palette, if I were to curate just to let you know, all of these are different in how many eyeshadows, depending on how many eyeshadows I actually wanted. That depended on how big the palette was. This one I only chose 8 shadows, so that's when I realized, so this isn't a palette for me. 8 out of 35. That does not make sense if I were to buy the whole palette. But this is the little palette I made. I'm gonna be looking down at what I made down here, and I would highly consider buying this if they made this, especially because they would make it pretty cheap if they had only 8 shadows. Yeah, I want more of the vibrant pinky purples. And the first shadow is more of like a probably champagne with a pink undertone. And I mean, that's super easy, gorgeous. And I took out all of the glitters because I don't want glitter on my eyes. Like all the glitter shades, they have some of those, not into it, nope. So I basically just chose 4 purple mattes with varying degrees of depth, and then 4 pinky purpley shimmers. And I feel like this is better. I don't know. It made me realize don't get this palette if you just want those. But if this was a palette, what do you think? Are you more attracted to this, or would you choose different eyeshadows from this 35 pan palette? Let's do a BH Cosmetics palette. I honestly don't know the name of this. I'll put up a picture. You can find it on their website. It's just a big old neutral palette, and it's huge. I wasn't super attracted to it, but I was like, this looks like something very utilitarian for me, but also has some really pretty useful shades. But why is it so large? Especially because it lacks a lot of depth. It is pretty much light and medium shades. It doesn't really have anything dark. So when I made my curated palette, it honestly looks the same. Can you tell it's any different? I don't know. I would consider buying something like this if I needed pinky neutrals, brownie, more, there's a bit of a coral. But honestly, even still, after I edited it down to like what eyeshadows I felt like I would use the most or wanted the most, I was like, is there even a difference? Like, they're both just so kind of blah to me. But maybe just because I already have neutrals, I'm just like, I want color. I'm not a person who likes bright color on my eyes. I like more either pastels or muted dusty color. I'm not much of a brown person. Like, today on my eyes, I have brown, but I also have like a greenish vibe. But yeah, I don't know, even when I edited this down, I was like, also, I know this doesn't look good, like the way I arranged it. I'm not experienced at editing things. I was just trying to get the point down, and I wasn't trying to make it look good. Like, I would probably arrange the shadows in a different way, but I just chose the easiest way to do it. I'm not gonna lie. Moving on to another Profusion palette. This one I was much more attracted to. I don't remember what it was called, and I don't feel like looking it up. But again, you can recognize it and then find it on their website. It's has a bunch of greens, some pinks, some purples, some blues, some browns. It basically has everything. But the things I was attracted to was the greens and the purpley blues. And so this edit I made actually is pretty big. It's 14 eyeshadows, so it's basically like a traditional Anastasia Beverly Hills eyeshadow palette. And I really like this palette I made. I still don't think I can justify a 35 pan palette if I only want 14 shades. But basically I took the second and third column for the most part, and then one of the greens was from the last column. The fifth and sixth column was the more purpley blue, and I took a lot from there. So I liked their periwinkles, and they had some kind of turquoisey blues, And then they also had purples, and so I tried to choose things where I could make an all-around look, so I added darker mattes, lighter mattes, darker shimmers, lighter shimmers. And I honestly really, it almost kind of looks like the e.l.f. Earth and Ocean palette, which if you've seen any video of mine, you know that I want that. But it's a little bit more on the purple side than the blue side, as well as it's a lot more green than just brown. Honestly, if this was a palette, not much would stop me from buying it. And it makes me sad that it's so unnecessarily large. Like the first row of neutrals, why is that even in there? Like the thing, when it's such a big palette, is there really a color story? Half the time it's just kind of like, here's a ton of variation of color, but when it's curated, you can really identify this is the color story they were going for. This is their inspiration. Then you can have ideas of what eye looks you can do. But when there's so many, it's not really a color story. It's just you can see color stories within it, but it's not one cohesive story. It's just a mess. I don't know. It just seems like too much to really tell a clear and concise story within the palette. And I think palettes do tell stories. And when they're so big, it kind of becomes hazy and vague and not as meaningful. So let me know, are you more interested in the edit I made, or would you buy that entire palette? Have you bought this palette? Is it worth it? Let me know. Now this last one is the only high-end one I did. I wanted to do one of the ABH Norvina palettes because they are one of the most recent big palettes to come out on the market. They came out with the 4th one recently, and I thought initially I was going to do edits of either the recent one or the 1st or 2nd one, because those ones I thought I'd be more attracted to. But at a closer inspection, I realized I didn't like those as much as I thought I would, enough to make edits of them. It was actually the one I thought I liked the least, that I found the most intriguing color story wise. It had this, I really like the contrasting colors of red and green. I find that in various just undertones, they can still work together. When they are very bright, like the primary and secondary contrast, they are very festive and fun and nostalgic in a way. But they can be very harsh. I think in eyeshadows, I wouldn't want that kind of color scheme. However, when they are more muted, then they can look very dramatic. It makes me think of the musical Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. Their whole color scheme is like a little bit more muted, or it's bright, but there is a bit of depth and darkness to it. And I love the contrast. It's very energetic, but also a bit grungy and almost like foreboding, because it is very dramatic. And when they're like dusty, like think of a sage green with like pastel-y, dusty pink, that's really pretty and calming. I just find that red and green work together on so many different levels and with so many different variations. And that's why that palette, at first I was like, oh, it's not really colors I'd reach for, and then looked at it again and I was like, actually, this is really intriguing. However, it seems unnecessarily large. There are a bit of like neutrals, because they did have a lot of neutrals, but there were a lot of those like white person crease shades, and there was like 5 of them, and they all looked really similar. There was one that was a bit more corally peachy, there was one that was a bit darker and rosier, there was one that was a bit nudier, one that was a bit more orange. Like they're all slightly different, but if you put them side by side, it was like, is this necessary? And they also had like 2 of the same kind of burgundy-ish, maroonish, dark purpley red. And they had a lot of matte greens, they had 2 yellows. They just had a lot of repeated shades, and they might be slightly different, but especially on the eyes, colors don't show that much of a difference compared to in the pan, unless if they are extremely pigmented, which I cannot attest for this formula or the pigmentation of this palette. However, this edit, I tried to, I wanted, like, there is a lot of oranges. I myself don't really like oranges. I don't like oranges as a color, with the exception of like on fall trees and leaves. Then I like orange. But I don't like orange on me. I say this as I have orange on my shirt. But if I were to choose a color, orange I think would be the last color I would choose, especially on my skin tone. So the only orange I really chose was the more neutral orange, which I think would look really pretty alongside, for instance, the blue, because orange and blue are also contrasting colors. So I thought there was the red and the green aspect of them being like very dramatic in their contrast, but there's also oranges and blues. And so that's why I thought the combination of oranges and rosy reds with like a tealish color scheme really makes it contrast with both. And so I did choose only one matte green. It was the more teal side because I wasn't into like the neon greens. But yeah, I liked that pale blue. It almost looks a little bit out of place because there is no other blue. They're all greens or teals, so I did think that was interesting, but I did like that color. So yeah, I had some darker, like deeper berry shades that I thought the contrast between those and the teals was so fascinating. And then I had that lime kind of green, lime yellow, I guess, because I thought it would pair well with the teals. Yeah, I just thought this color scheme was really fascinating, but with that many colors, it kind of lost the intrigue that I had in it. I was like, there's just too much here. But if they were to edit it down, I think they could have really been onto something. But I don't think this massive palette needed to be this massive. I don't know, I just feel like when you make something smaller, it's just, people are more willing to buy it because one, is probably gonna be cheaper. First off, we don't need giant pans either. Some people are like, oh, well, it has a ton of product. Unless if you have a very small makeup collection or you are an intense project panner, there is a high likelihood that you will not go through your eyeshadow, like use it all the way up before it gets too old and loses its quality. So why do so many brands think that making giant pans justifies the price when they know that we aren't going to use that much product? Especially Juvia's Place, what are you doing with your ginormous, just those 9-pan palettes could be so much smaller. Like, why don't they make them all the size of like the Magic Mini pans? Because we don't need like a blush sized eyeshadow. Who goes through that? Like, unless if that's your one and only palette you use for like 5 years, are you going to go through those massive pans? Probably not. Probably not. So not only should brands start making more curated color stories, but also just make things smaller in general. It's more travel friendly, it's more eco-friendly because you're making less packaging, and it's also just more friendly for our pockets, you know? Like, if it's less money, more people might be willing to buy it. Yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Let me know if you enjoyed my edits, how you would have edited them, or what colors you found yourself most attracted to in palettes, or just in palettes that I haven't done. I might consider doing something like this again, but I'd have to find enough palettes that I'd be interested enough to edit down, because I don't want to just do it with palettes. If I'm not interested in the color scheme, then I wouldn't be interested in making a curated color scheme, if that makes sense. Let me know if you agree with just wanting smaller palettes in general, or if you really like giant palettes. Let me know. I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that you have an amazing day. Bye!